Good afternoon. So one of the things that I want to start with is a disclaimer, because I never actually had any training in fundraising, but I had the tutelage of in my 40 years, two advancement directors that I worked with. The first 10 years into my tenure as a head, and she worked with me for 26 years until she left the school. And then most recently, a new advancement director. So I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself someone who's kind of learned on the job. And so what I'm going to share with you is the things that I think I learned. I sent out an outline. We probably won't get through the entire outline. And I hope this can be interactive so that those of you who've joined us will feel free to ask questions as we go along, as you think of things you want to know or you want to probe more deeply on a point. The first thing I will say to you as a head of school is that I think a lot of schools begin the cultivation process with their donors, their parents, their constituents, once they're in the school. I think that's a huge mistake, because I think the first time you engage with a potential donor, especially a parent, who are always going to be our main sources of institutional giving, I think that begins with the first inquiry to the school and the admissions process. And I think that's really, really important. So as you think about the professional development of the parent body and your prospective applicants to the school, think about it at the point of the first inquiry. What's on your website about fundraising? What's in your admissions brochures? As those families come into the school and attend your open houses and go on tours of the school, what will they see around the school that will talk about the philanthropic environment of the school and the culture of giving in the school? That's going to include things like donor walls, brochures about fundraising that are prominently on display, capital campaign brochures, those sorts of things, and begin talking about what you expect from the parent as a potential donor and volunteer from the moment they walk into that first open house, because they're going to make their decision based on what they think their job and partnership will be like in the school. And if you miss that opportunity, you miss the opportunity to say, we told you about this when you applied. You accepted our invitation to be a part of the school community. So let's think carefully about that first interaction. I think that's really important. So you're training them from the very beginning as partners, as volunteers, as students also. You're going to develop a professional development program for parents, and always that fundraising mantra, your philosophy about fundraising, your philosophy about their participation begins with their first entree into the school community. So advancing the mission of the school is critically important, and it's on all of your job descriptions. Your role will be shared with the board, because they are the other leadership arm of the institution, and they have a stake in the fundraising and advancement of the school, as well as your advancement departments and all of the people in the school community. So the annual fundraising sort of evolves in four major ways. You may have an additional way in your school, but I would say the annual fund, the event fundraising that sometimes goes on, your major gift efforts, your capital fundraising, which then divides into two major areas: building efforts for campus enhancements, and then endowment in some schools. So, making the case for support. I think it's critically important that your case statements and your statements about whether you're talking about annual funds or endowment or any other kind of capital efforts, what you say to people you're raising money for is going to be critically important. And one of the things that makes fundraising easier is if you've been transparent about the operating budget of the school and the funds on hand. And that takes the place of having to educate a donor in your presence about the financial health of the school in a moment when you're doing an ask, and having that foundation already laid as a part of their education. We always used to use our state of the school meeting to go through the budget of the school every year to both justify the tuition increases, as well as to think about what was the message we wanted to get out about whatever kind of fundraising we were going to do. So if you're educating volunteers as part of your fundraising effort, you also need to make sure that you're educating parents, you're educating alums, you're educating your faculty, staff, and administration, because they're going to be a part of the team, even though they're not necessarily going to be in the ask. Parents who are close to faculty and staff in your school are going to be asking questions of them like, what do you think of this capital campaign? What is the annual fund money really used for? Does it really go to your professional development? How do you see yourselves as benefiting from the annual fund or the capital campaign? Or are you pleased with the kind of raises you've gotten this year? So educating and seeing to the professional development of every part of your constituency, including your grandparents, becomes particularly important. So you're going to research every effort and think about your needs, and then you're going to create a case. You're going to create points that you're raising for money annually. You're going to create money for a major gift campaign or a rationale for a major gift campaign. And you want to make sure that you've also taken the time to educate your board, because that's critically important. You're going to want board members in asks with you. You're always going to go to the board in any kind of effort, whether it's annual fund, endowment, capital campaign, major gift campaign, to ask them to participate first. And you're going to educate your staff about their need to support those efforts as well. I used to challenge the faculty, staff, and administration every year at the opening staff meeting to be the first people that came in at 100% in the annual fund, even before the board and before any other group in the school, before we even went out to people. And so they took that challenge to heart and used to come in at 100%. And I would say to them, the amount doesn't matter. What's more important is that you're giving a message by coming in at 100% that you think the annual support of the school is important, and you've done that, and they would see it as imperative that they came in every year, even ahead of the Board of Trustees. So that was a nice way to start the giving year, by being able to say at that first board meeting, I just want you to know, the faculty, staff, and administration is already in at 100%. And what you're really striving for in every campaign is the percentage of participation as well as the fundraising goal. Because the more you can say to people, we've got a huge level of participation by every constituency in the school, the more others will join your efforts. You're not going to get 100% from the alums. You're not going to get 100% from the grandparents because they're ancillary. But one of the things that you do want to do is to think very carefully about those important constituents, and that's the faculty, staff, administration, and the board before you go out to the parent body and then the other constituencies of the school for any kind of effort. Developing the strategies of the campaign and campaign materials is becoming increasingly important. What's on your website, what you hand out in writing. It's amazing how long some of these families are in our schools and how much of our materials and how many of our materials they've saved over the years. So never say in any campaign, we're only going to come to you this once. Because if you have families in your school, as I've had in mine, that have been continual members of the parent body for 20 or 25 years, and that happens, you're going to have multiple campaigns. The one thing I would say to you that's important to remember is you're going to be fundraising your entire career in the school. There's never going to be a time anymore when you're not thinking about fundraising. And so to say to people, we're only going to come to you once, sometimes you have to eat those words, and they're bitter going down. So you need to be able to go to people when you have a need. And sometimes that need will be an emergency in the life of a school. So you want to be prepared to go back either to a small group of people or have a larger effort in order to say that. But they keep files of materials, letters, pledge cards, thank you notes, you've sent them over time. So that's critically important. It's also critically important that no matter how small or how large your operation, you've developed a gift policy. One that's tried and true, that's been reviewed by the board and adopted by the board as they adopt every other policy in the school, and one that's been looked at by legal counsel. As you know, it's very hard to make a pledge that's irrevocable. So one of the things that you want to do is put compelling language in your pledge materials, in your letters for the campaign, that make it hard emotionally for someone to renege on a campaign. And so those pledge forms become critically important. And you want to make sure that you've had your legal team of the school, your outside legal counsel, to review those materials so that if you ever have to go after a pledge, you'll be clear about the circumstances with which you can disengage or the donor can disengage. In my last year as a head of school, I actually revoked a re-enrollment contract from a family that had been very abusive about how they had gone about making a pledge to the school and then how they reneged on a pledge for the school. And because they had done it with a lot of fanfare and a lot of publicity, I needed to have the legal authority and ability, both with the enrollment contract and with the pledge form, to ask them to leave the school as a parent partner and as a donor. And it took 40 years as a head of school for that to happen. But it turned out to be singularly important in the life of the school that someone who had made such a big splash about making a major commitment to the school, that other families understood, because of course they weren't quiet when they were asked to leave the school about them being asked to leave. So those kinds of things become important. What we put in writing matters. And it should also be tied to the enrollment contract and the contract and covenant you have with the various constituencies in the school. Remember that you never fundraise alone. You're going to need the support of a development staff if you have one. My first 10 years as a head of school, I had no development office. But then when I got a development officer, which came in the form of a consultant at first and later as a part-time employee, that person became one of my trusted partners and also one of the people that I relied on most to teach me about fundraising. And later, as the staff grew, each of the positions that we added to development office became critically important as we thought about the team and what we added and why we added them and how we introduced them to the larger community of the school. Because they join you in being the professional development educators of the volunteers with whom they're going to work on a daily basis sometimes. Feel free to stop me if you want clarification on a point or you want to go in another direction. So
Reveta,
training, but yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question? It's Larry from Poly Prep. I'm wondering,
Hi, Larry.
when you said you tied your pledges to enrollment contract, how did that actually work?
We talked about the financial obligations of parents as partners in the school. And one of the things that we were explicit about was not only their financial obligation for fees, tuition, those kinds of things, but those things that they voluntarily pledged to the school. So pledge forms became a part of things that they were obligated to pay off. Now we know that those aren't enforceable in a certain sense, but a moral obligation to honor the things that you have agreed into. And that's why the language of the pledge form, the language of our parent covenant, and the language of our enrollment contract became particularly important. Does that help?
It does, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So people and training become critically important. And that goes to not only the professional development of your parent body, but the professional development of the people with whom you work. You've got to invest the time and the resources of the school in creating a budget for their professional development as well. So the conferences and meetings that the people in your development office need to go to, the professional development of the board. We had a board professional development budget. It was part of the board budget over the years. That trustee that would go to me to a case conference became a part of that professional development of the board. And one of the things that we did was create a folder for every board member that wrote down each year the professional development activities that they participated in. Whether it was a parent evening and a parent speaker, a conference they went to, an opportunity they took to go to a workshop, a financial aid workshop or something like that, so that as we kept track of the professional development of the faculty, we were keeping track of the professional credentials of the individual trustees and the board as a whole. So when we brought somebody in to speak to the board, that became a part of their professional development as well. And then you're going to begin to test your case. You're going to train your trustees, your volunteers. You're going to test your case on your board and on your volunteers. You're going to develop job descriptions for your various volunteer jobs in philanthropy, whether that's volunteers who are going to work on your capital campaign or your events or your annual fund, so that they know exactly what's expected of them and what are the things that you can count on them doing as a part of that partnership. And then a job description that clarifies who pays for hosting events. Is it the school that shares those expenses? Or if you've got volunteers who are hosting dinners or cocktail parties or that kind of thing, because that will all go in your budgeting for your campaigns and for your various activities for the year. Remember that cultivation equals success. You have to do the research, but you also have to remember that you can't go in cold and expect a new family in the school to give you a gift outright. But those kinds of things take cultivation, whether it's through the process as you're onboarding trustees or onboarding new parents in the school or onboarding faculty, staff, and administrators or grandparents or anything else. Cultivation, cultivate, remind them they're being cultivated for various kinds of things, and then see to their enculturation as a part of their donor relationship with the school. Research is critically important as a part of that cultivation experience. So there's a direct correlation between how much you know and how much you can prospect over time. And that includes databases and membership and programs that you can use, publications and search engine research, other annual reports for other schools, whether it's the colleges and universities that your parents and grandparents have gone to, or whether it's the annual reports of the secondary schools that they send their children to. It's very disheartening to find that a parent still has 3 children in your school, but they're giving more to the secondary school than they're giving to the 3 children left in your school. So that kind of donor research about keeping a pace of what kind of fundraising they're doing as you leave their institution with their older children, as much as what they are philanthropically doing in the community beyond the school. more and more is that on the application to your schools, we're often collecting research about boards people are on, their civic engagement and responsibilities, the kind of other institutions they support with their philanthropic dollars, their allegiances and alumni relationships, all kinds of things. So the more comprehensive your research prior to them coming into the school community, the more you will have a rich database once they come in. And invest in that database so that it works for you as you think about your campaigns and the research you're going to pick up before you're going to be able to go into any kind of formal cultivation and then prospect mining with those families. So you're going to look at history of past giving, occupational research. If you have a parent that works from a firm that you know gives stock options, for example, what are those stock options worth before you sit down with a family? Look at what those stock options are selling for, because if they've got appreciated stock, that's going to be a much less painful way to give. And then you're going to keep those options open. Do the generational research. Find out who the grandparents are in the family. One of the things that we don't inspect enough is who's paying the tuition in your school. If you find that there's a family foundation or a grandparent who's paying the tuition, then you're going to want to look at that research and ask yourself whether this is going to be a multi-generational ask, and whether, rather than just going to the parents, you're going to want their permission to invite grandparents to be a part of that ask as you sit down and think about those families. And then you're going to want to do your research if there are current parents or grandparents in the school with how those children are doing in school. There's nothing worse than walking into a meeting with a donor and not knowing that there are problems or situations going on in the school with the child, or finding out that one of your administration team has been in talks with that family about finding another school for that child or counseling out that child, or just the week before there were major disciplinary issues with that child. So that's going to be critically important that you have up-to-date research, even checking in with the rest of your admin team before you go into a meeting the next day or the next evening. Okay? Questions about anything I've said there? Okay. Don't hesitate to stop me. So the ask, which is critically important, we're getting to that moment when you're going to sit down. You won't always have control of the circumstances. Sometimes you will be going to the donor. Other times you will be asking the donor to come to you. Rather than go to donors' homes or do asks in restaurants, I always liked to do asks at school. If I could get donors, both parts of a couple, if I was looking at a couple, or all the members of a family to come to the school. Because I thought I could set the stage much more explicitly if I had control over the environment. And there would be times when I would ask a couple or a parent to get up and take a walk with me through the school as we progressed on the ask. Or I had something I wanted them to see that we were reaching for. And so having that ask at school was a real preference for me. There were times when it was important that I got into the home because it gave me cues. But part of getting into the home could be part of the cultivation process rather than waiting until the moment when you're going to do the ask. But the school should be the place they feel extraordinarily comfortable. And therefore, I could control how close the tissues were. You'd be shocked the number of parents who begin to cry during an ask. especially those who've had long histories with the school. And nothing's more embarrassing to them than having their nose run and you don't have a box of tissues in the office. So make sure that you set the stage with some hard candies nearby, a bottle of water, some tissues, comfortable seating, control the air conditioning, and control visually what's up. One of the things that I did for a couple of people that I knew were hard nutcases was I would do them in my small conference room. I'd have pictures of the school up on the wall. And I even went so far as to create placemats that had pictures of, in one case, their grandchildren doing various things in the school community that I laminated and had as placemats when they walked in the room. So I had concrete examples of the kinds of rich experiences their children were having in the life of the school. Sometimes you feel like you're manipulating the hell out of a situation, but if it yields you the gift or the interest that you want, then that's something that you have to do. The other thing I took to doing was creating placemats that I could put down in the boardroom that changed occasionally so that as trustees walked into the room from time to time, they had visualizations of what was going on in the life of the school. They're very easy to make. We'd make them, we'd put together collages, we'd laminate them, and trustees were thrilled to have that pictorial evidence as they walked into the room of the rich life of what was going in the school. So, setting the stage for the ask again, you want to have note paper close by. The more sophisticated the donor, the better the questions they're going to ask and the deeper they're going to pry into the readiness of the school to be asking for money. Who you have in the room is going to be critically important. Sometimes having a trustee that's a dear friend is going to be important. But remember, part of the time, if you're going into a major ask, your trustee may not want to be in the room because they're afraid that that person is going to turn around and ask them for money for their favorite charity as well. So trustees over time can sometimes get to be really gun shy in joining you on asks because they also know that tit for tat, that person that they're asking for in the parent body may have a favorite charity of their own that they're going to be turning to that trustee and asking for later. But having that person in the peer group who has given at the level that they're going to be asked to give at is important, because knowing there's a peer in the room, you can't always hide between the other things you're doing philanthropically in your life or what your financial situation is. It is often very well known to that other person who's been asked and has given at that same level. Communicate to the staff that you don't want to be disturbed. I have an open door policy when my door is open. I'm happy to have anybody walk in the room. But occasionally, there's that child who will walk in and open your door, or that upset parent or that upset trustee. So you want to make sure that you've either locked your door or that you have a sign on the outside that says you're in a meeting or a conference. I had a whole series of laminated signs that I would put up with a clip on the outside of my door. Critical meeting, please do not disturb. Ask the receptionist when I'm available, or please knock before entering, those kinds of things. But if you really don't want to be disturbed, have something on the outside of your door that people know it's a time that you don't want to be disturbed. I cannot tell you how important it is that you understand clearly the finances of the school and where the school is in any given time in an ask. That sophisticated donor that you're going to be asking for perhaps a large gift from is going to ask about debt. They're going to ask about debt covenants. They're going to ask about how your investment portfolio is structured and how much you have in investment. They're going to ask about liquidity. They're going to ask about how much you've raised and from what kinds of sources. They're going to ask very sophisticated questions. And if you're not comfortable with answering those questions, then have someone in the room who is comfortable so that you're not taken aback and feel as though you're flummoxed and you've got this long list of questions that you need answers to do before you can go back to that person and close the ask. Some of the questions will be a delaying tactic. It'll be an opportunity for that donor to put you off getting to the ask and the final ask. So make sure that you've got the answers to those questions for yourselves, and that becomes critically important. Understand also when it is important to decline a gift. There is nothing wrong with saying to a donor, you know what, that is extraordinarily generous of you to want to build us a pool. But right now, that's not on our priority, because donors will often have a project in mind that's important to them, but not a priority for the school. And don't make the mistake of believing that you can take a gift for one project and then persuade the donor later on to change their mind. Because once you've accepted a gift, you're sort of honor bound ethically to make sure that that is a priority for the school. So know what is an idea that you're willing to come back to later and discuss further, but also know when you don't want to accept a gift. And that's particularly important in terms of unappreciated stock or real property. Sometimes a donor will be asking you to take a piece of property. We had a grandparent that wanted to give us 2 homes that they had built in Mexico. They were beautiful, they were brand new, but he wanted us to take the property right away, and that became really problematic for us. So always say, well, let us do some research and learn more about that before we understand the terms under which we could accept that property. Because it turned out we didn't want that property. That it was going to cost us a lot to maintain that property until we had the best buyer in the market. And that we weren't going to be able to credit that donation at what he termed the real value of that property in today's current market climate. So understand what you can take and what you cannot take, or what you should take, or what you should postpone until you've able to do some research. Understand your gift policy. And in fact, I think it's always a good idea to have copies in writing. Have a copy also of the naming opportunities. There's nothing wrong, even if you're not completing a gift in that moment, of aspirationally putting a gift table in front of a parent or a grandparent and saying to them, these are the current opportunities. They may not be all there when you're ready to make your gift, but I want you to see the range of gifts that are available at this moment. Never give someone a gift table with opportunities that are much lower than the ask. Always make sure that you're giving them the table that's within a reasonable range of your ask. So if you're going in asking for a $500,000 gift, you don't want things in that gift table that are going to be $50,000 or even $100,000. You may want to start at $200,000 or $300,000 so that there's not the latitude for them to drop down and offer you a $50,000 gift, because there's something that's very appealing unless they're going to look at multiple naming opportunities as a part of the gift. Understand as a part of your gift policy when that gift would be named also. Is it not going to be named until the entire gift is paid for completely? Or is it going to be named after you get to 50% of the pledge payments in hand? Or whatever the terms are in your gift policy, make sure they're understood before the gift so that you're not agreeing to something that's not going to be possible. And also understand what your current policy is with regard to current students still in the school and naming opportunities. For us as an elementary school, we never liked to name a gift while a current student was in the school. We might name a family gift, but we would never put children's names as part of an entire family as long as they were still current students. So understand the different parameters of that gift policy. I always think there are 4 critically important questions to get on the table as a part of an ask, and I sent them to you in the handout. Begin with how the prospect feels about the school. That's before you even get to the project, describing the prospect or describing the project that you're going to be asking money for. You want them to express their affection for the school. You want them to tell you how important the school is to their child. And even prompting questions like, what was it that brought you to the school in the first place? How did you happen to hear about the school? What has your level of experience at the school been like since you've been here? And then you have to be prepared to hear about things that they love and things that they don't like. And they're often the things that I used to talk about in the admissions process that we had no intention of changing. You enter our school, you're going to not have uniforms. You enter our school, your children are going to be calling us by their first names. They may be the things that they regret once they're in the school that still aren't going to change, but they've never forgotten that they would have preferred to go to a school that had those kinds of things. So you've got to be prepared to hear about those. But what you always want to get is the quality and the affective experience that they are having in the school. How they feel about the place, the people, their children or grandchildren's experience, their experience with the teaching faculty, and then get them to talk about their part in the future of the school. So that's critically important. How they're feeling will gauge where you take the ask next and whether you think this is going to be an opportunity to close the meeting with an ask. The next is, what do they think after you've made your presentation about the project that you're asking them for the money for? How do they feel about the building you're going to build, the endowments you're planning, the new fund you're creating for the school? How does that resonate with what you have felt the school needs? How does that resonate with your experience in other schools, and that sort of thing? Whether that will give you a sense of whether your case for support has been compelling to them as you've gone through it and gotten the opportunity to get that ask out on the table. And then next, do the ask. How do you feel about participating in our project at a level of X? It's important that you give them an idea of what you're thinking of in terms of an ask. If you've way overshot, you'll see that look of surprise on their face, and they may say to you, I had no idea you were going to ask for that amount of money. We want to participate in this campaign. We'd be much more comfortable coming in at a level of X, Y, and Z. If you know that to be bull, then you want them to walk away from the ask, not your having accepted a gift at that level, but I really want you to think about what would be an ask that would, of course, stretch you a little bit, but would help us better achieve our goal. And that's a way of sending them away thinking about stretching, because a lot of the most sophisticated donors will lowball a gift and then say to you, well, I really hadn't planned on giving at that level. I have X, Y, and Z that I'm currently committed to. And then you want to talk with them about making a larger pledge, but perhaps backloading that pledge. Make your payments smaller in the beginning so that as you pay off your other obligations, it frees up money later on as you finish those obligations to then make larger payments to the school. but understand fully that once that pledge is booked, it is booked for the entire amount of the pledge. So you want to really think carefully about what you will accept, but also what you want to send a donor away thinking about. It's very seldom that you're going to get that ask at the first time you've made it. Most people will need to go away and think about it. They'll need to talk to someone in their life, if it's a major donation, that has a better idea of their finances and their financial obligations. And they'll also want to think about where you are on their list of philanthropy. Are you close to the top? Or would they rather, because of what they have on their plate right now, and perhaps their experience in philanthropy, think about a planned gift to the school? Maybe they've been a donor that's been very supportive already, but as their child is approaching graduation or as their last grandchild is leaving the school, whether you can rely on them to be a part of their estate plan and be remembered as a part of their family and as a part of the future of the school in their planned giving and their thought about where you are on the list of philanthropy they'd like to make after they have planned their estate. So all of those kinds of things. And then you want to think about the way they can give. And you want to have a menu of opportunities that you're sophisticated about that you put before them. Do they want to give appreciated stock or appreciated property? And what would that be like? And can we think together about that and do some research about what that would look like for you and for the school? Planned gift, that estate planning, trust, insurance gifts, where they take out and pay for an insurance policy that comes to the school at term. Some of our best and most wonderful gifts have been in kind. Space that we needed, parking, things that we needed for the school. One of the best families in the school, for 18 years, they owned a printing company and they did every single piece of printing we needed for 18 consecutive years. Every pledge card, every admissions brochure, every annual report. That was a huge gift to the school when you looked at 18 years of cumulative printing expenses. So sometimes you have the opportunity to ask for things rather than cash donations that in the end wound up being much more than a family could give you in cash. Front loading or back loading gifts, we talked a little bit about. Longer pledge periods. You ask for a $500,000 gift and they say, it's a 5-year pledge, we couldn't possibly do $100,000 a year. And if you have flexibility, you can say to them, well, let's think about backloading that pledge and doing it over 7 years rather than 5. Because what you really want is that $500,000 pledge booked on the books of the school and something that you can rely on. And then you're going to look at family gifts, intergenerational giving, and the opportunity to get a whole family in, grandparents, and that's especially good with alum parents in the school. Those parents who went to the school themselves, their parents wanted their grandchildren there, and they may have a wonderful opportunity to come in and add to the gift. And that's a part of your research. If those grandparents are paying for those grandchildren's tuition, it's likely that they're putting the money in trust for their children's future philanthropy as well. So bringing them in and making part of that initial solicitation can be very important. And last but not least, some of the hardest money to get are foundation gifts. But once you've established relationships with foundation, they take the same kind of nurturance, being sent publications from the school, inviting them to school events, having them tour the schools that you do. So you're going to do the same kind of cultivation with foundations that you're going to do with your donors before you have that gift. And in the end, you're going to offer your thanks, even if you're disappointed. So we're now at 10 minutes before the hour, so I should probably stop and open it up for questions.
Reveta, could I ask, it's Matthew Stewart. How are you?
I'm great.
When you, early on when you started, did you as the head always do the ask? I mean, I know some schools I've worked at, the head was there, but the board member did the actual ask. What's your thinking about that?
Depends
early on.
It depends on the culture of your board. My board, when I started, and you've got to remember that was the dark ages, was used to, the school when I took it over was functioning in the red. So I had trustees that used to divide the operating deficit every year, and then they'd write a check so that the school would start with a balanced budget. Now, it was a very small budget because it was a very small school, but they hadn't ever done any fundraising except for things. They would have a campaign where they'd send a letter out to the parent body and say, we need to air condition the building. It's going to cost $15,000. We'd love your help. That sort of thing. So I did the first annual fund of the school 8 years into my headship. And I did the first capital campaign at the same time because I needed to develop a culture of annual fundraising and capital fundraising at the same time. So I was not only one of the first people who did the ask, but I brought board members in with me because a lot of them had not been used to asking for money for schools. They were wonderful people, but they came from fields where in the beginning, until we began to change the culture on the board, they weren't used to asking for money. So I started in the beginning. Then I had wonderful trustees who stepped up and kind of pushed me back for several years and did a lot of the fundraising. But then when we started to do big capital fundraising, they realized that current parents especially only wanted to talk to me because I could answer their questions about how the building process or how the building would impact the curriculum, the pedagogy, the lives of the faculty and the staff during the building process. That help? Other questions? Anything we didn't cover that you want to ask about?
I have a question, Reveta. This is Antoine from UNIS, from the United Nations International School. Maybe as a segue to the question you just answered, how do you differentiate the role of the advancement director and the head of school? Is it the head of school only working on major asks, or is it always a pair with, assuming of course there is an advancement director, or is it a matter of amounts? I mean, how does it work exactly? How do you see that working?
Well, you know, with my advancement director who was with me for almost 3 decades, she often did major asks with me because she had been a parent in the school. Her children were grown and had left the school. So often she had wonderful relationships with those people. They had been volunteers, they had been gala chairs, they had been annual fund chairs, they had been coveted annual fund volunteers. So who is in the ask is one of the most important questions you're going to ask yourselves. There were occasions where once in a while she would do an ask herself with somebody else, but she rarely did major asks. Those mostly fell to me, and sometimes in combination with a trustee. Once in a while I had a trustee in my last couple of campaigns that did major asks themselves, but it was only because they had a special relationship with the person and they had done much of the cultivation of that donor.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else I can answer for you?
Reveta, I have a question. If you could go back to that moment when you make the ask that is higher than the donor expects, and that dance. Could you go over that again or talk about that in a little more detail?
Well, I think you always want to be aspirational, but if your research has been good, you don't want to so over ask that the donor gasps. Now, So that history of philanthropy, if you have somebody and your research says they've never made more than a $100,000 gift in their entire philanthropy, it's going to be hard for you to get a $2 million gift unless the school is their passion. So you want to start with gifts that are realistic. If you feel you've overreached, it's usually because they have other things on their philanthropic priorities. They may be giving to a major gift campaign in their university or the secondary school where their children are, or they've got a charity that they're on the board of. So that's why the research becomes important. So I think in that moment, they came knowing. Nobody comes into your office and makes an appointment where you said, I want to talk to you about the capital campaign, that they don't understand that you're dialing for dollars. But I think asking at that point, well, as you came into this, did you have a gift level in mind? What were you thinking? And what would be a gift level that would make you proud to be able to participate in this campaign? And I always push back on them. Don't give us something that's going to embarrass the school and embarrass you too. So think about what would give you pride and give your family a feeling that you're giving at a level that would be significant for your family. What did you have in mind? In all my years of giving, I've only been surprised by asking for a gift level that a donor then exceeded. And it was one of my first major gift solicitations. And I was asking a younger couple who had a major family foundation in their family. And I felt good asking. We had researched the gift and thought that we might have a chance at a $3 million gift. The board members who knew the donor thought that might be possible. That was going to be a big gift for us. And so we went in and I started describing how their children were doing in school and how well I knew their children and their day-to-day experience in the school. And I saw this father, and it was his family foundation, start to tear up. And I thought, good, this is good. And so I went in and I said, I want to ask if you'll consider a very generous lead gift of $3 million. And he paused for a moment, he grabbed a tissue, took a gulp of water, and surprised his wife by saying, I would like to give you 5.
Well done.
Now, at that point, I gulped, got a tissue, and I took a drink of water. But in all my 40 years of asking for money, that's the only time that has happened.
Thank you.
That help?
That helps. Thank you.
And you know what? In the beginning, we were trying to get families in an annual fund to give us $1,000, $500. We were going for 100%. And that was our philosophy from 40 years ago till I left the school last year. But event fundraising became not just people coming in to give money at the event, it became the celebration of being a parent in the school every year. They looked forward to those events. They looked forward to that gala, that silent auction, that dance, that entertainment. It was the adult social event of the year, and we made it possible for all the families in our socioeconomic spectrum to be there. And the end result was they got a little soused. They had such a good time that we raised a lot of money over time.